pottage is ready.
The bread is perfectly baked today.
Have you ever wondered what secrets the kitchens of the Middle Ages once held? Imagine a world where the flavors on your plate were nothing like anything you've ever tasted today. Centuries ago, people across Europe relied on foods that have now completely vanished from our tables. These weren't just meals, they were the lifeblood of entire communities, shaped by the land, the seasons, and the struggles of daily survival. But as time marched on, wars, plagues, and changing climates swept these ancient dishes into the shadows of history. Today, even the names of some of these foods are forgotten, buried in dusty manuscripts and fading memories. What if I told you that the bread you eat, the vegetables you know, and the grains you take for granted are only a small part of what once existed? What if the real story of medieval food is not just about what survived, but about what was lost? Tonight, we're going to open the doors to a forgotten world, a world where farmers, cooks, and families depended on ingredients and recipes that have disappeared forever. We'll uncover the stories behind 7 medieval foods that once nourished kings and peasants alike, but have now vanished from the face of the earth. Why did these foods disappear? What happened to the crops and animals that once filled medieval kitchens? And what can their stories teach us about our own food, our history, and the fragile connection between people and the land? Get ready to travel back in time to a place where every meal was a struggle, every harvest a gamble, and every bite a taste of survival. This is the story of 7 lost foods from the Middle Ages, dishes that shaped a civilization and then slipped away into the mists of time. Are you ready to discover what the world has forgotten? Let's begin. 1. Historical background. When we think of the Middle Ages, we often imagine castles, knights, and epic battles. But behind the walls of those castles and beyond the fields of war, daily life was shaped by something much more fundamental: food. For most people, life in the Middle Ages revolved around the rhythms of farming and the struggle to put food on the table. The majority of the population were peasants, living in small villages and working the land from sunrise to sunset. Their days were dictated by the seasons: planting in the spring, tending crops in the summer, harvesting in the fall, and surviving the long, harsh winters. Farming was hard, and the tools were simple. There were no tractors or modern fertilizers. Instead, people relied on wooden plows, hand tools, and the strength of animals like oxen and horses. The land itself was divided into strips, shared among families, and every inch was precious. A bad harvest could mean hunger, or even death. Food was not just a matter of taste or preference, it was a matter of survival. Most meals were simple and repetitive. Bread, made from whatever grain was available, was the staple of the medieval diet. Vegetables like onions, leeks, and cabbages were common, while meat was a rare luxury for most. People ate what they could grow, gather, or trade locally. Markets were small and long-distance trade was limited. Exotic spices and foods from faraway lands were reserved for the wealthy and powerful. For everyone else, the diet was shaped by the land and the seasons. Preserving food was a constant challenge. Without refrigeration, people had to salt, smoke, dry, or pickle their food to make it last through the winter. Every meal was a reminder of the hard work that went into producing it. Food was also deeply connected to culture and tradition. Feasts marked important events, while fasting and religious rules shaped what could be eaten and when. Local ingredients and recipes were passed down through generations, creating a rich tapestry of regional cuisines. But as time went on, many of these foods and traditions began to disappear. New crops, changing climates, and the rise of cities transformed the way people ate. Some food survived while others faded into history. Today, the story of medieval food is not just about what people ate, but about how food shaped their lives, their communities, and their world. Understanding what was once on the medieval table helps us see how much has changed, and what we may have lost along the way. 2. List of 7 missing foods. Let S step into a medieval kitchen and discover 7 lost foods that once filled the tables of Europe. Each dish tells a story of survival, tradition, and change. First, there's frumenti. This was a thick porridge made from boiled wheat grains, often mixed with milk, eggs, or broth. Frumenti was a staple for both peasants and nobles, especially during feast days. It was cooked slowly over an open fire, sometimes sweetened with honey or flavored with spices if available. But as potatoes and rice became more common, frumenti faded away, replaced by new staples and changing tastes. Next, we have lamprey pie. Lampreys are jawless fish that were once considered a delicacy, especially among the English nobility. The pie was made by baking lampreys with spices, wine, and sometimes even sugar. It was a dish reserved for special occasions and royal banquets. However, overfishing, pollution, and changing river systems led to the decline of lampreys, and the dish disappeared from the menu. Another lost food is manchet bread. Unlike the coarse, dark bread eaten by most peasants, manchet was a fine white bread made from sifted wheat flour. It was a symbol of status and wealth, served at the tables of the rich. The dough was kneaded by hand and baked in wood-fired ovens, resulting in a soft, airy loaf. As milling technology improved and white bread became more accessible, manchet lost its exclusivity and eventually vanished. Then there's pottage of Alexander's. Alexander's is a wild herb, once widely cultivated and used in soups and stews. The pottage was a thick, hearty dish, simmered with vegetables, grains, and sometimes bits of meat. It was a common meal in medieval households, especially in spring. But as new vegetables like celery and parsley became popular, Alexander's fell out of favor and disappeared from gardens and kitchens. Peacock roast was another showstopper at medieval feasts. Peacocks were not just admired for their beauty, they were also eaten by the wealthy. The bird was roasted whole, often with its feathers reattached for dramatic presentation. The meat was tough and not particularly tasty, but serving peacock was a display of power and extravagance. Over time, changing tastes and the decline of peafowl farming led to the end of this extravagant dish. Salad of purslane was a popular salad made from purslane, a wild, succulent plant. It was mixed with vinegar, oil, and sometimes herbs or onions. Purslane was valued for its refreshing taste and nutritional benefits. But as agriculture became more commercialized and new salad greens were introduced, purslane was labeled a weed and forgotten. Finally, there's gruel of spelt. Spelt is an ancient grain, once a staple in medieval Europe. Gruel was made by boiling spelt with water or milk, creating a simple, nourishing meal. It was especially important during times of scarcity. But as wheat varieties improved and diets changed, spelt cultivation declined, and gruel became a relic of the past. Each of these lost foods was once a vital part of daily life. Their disappearance tells us about the forces that shape our diets: climate, technology, culture, and even fashion. Imagine a table filled with these forgotten dishes, the aroma of herbs and grains, the warmth of a shared meal. This is the lost world of medieval food, waiting to be rediscovered. 3. Impact of the loss of food. The disappearance of these medieval foods is more than just a change in what people eat. It's a story of how culture, tradition, and even the land itself can be transformed by time. When a food vanishes, it takes with it a piece of local identity. For centuries, communities were defined by the crops they grew, the recipes they shared, and the meals they celebrated together. Losing a traditional dish means losing the stories, memories, and rituals that once brought people together. It's not just about taste, it's about heritage. The loss of these foods also changed the landscape of agriculture. When farmers stopped growing ancient grains like spelt or wild herbs like Alexander's, entire ecosystems shifted. Fields that once buzzed with a variety of plants became dominated by just a few commercial crops. Biodiversity declined, and with it, the resilience of local agriculture. Traditional farming methods, passed down through generations, were replaced by new technologies and monoculture. This made farming more efficient, but also more vulnerable to disease, pests, and climate change. The shift in food culture was driven by many forces. The rise of cities and the growth of trade brought new ingredients and new tastes. People wanted foods that were easier to grow, store, and transport. Industrialization and modern science promised higher yields and more consistent products. But in the process, many unique flavors and traditions were lost. As old foods disappeared, so did the knowledge of how to prepare them. Recipes that had been handed down for centuries were forgotten. Cooking techniques, preservation methods, and even the tools used in medieval kitchens faded into obscurity. The connection between people and the land weakened. Instead of eating what was grown locally, people began to rely on food from faraway places. This made diets less diverse and more dependent on global supply chains. The loss of traditional foods also affected celebrations and rituals. Feasts that once featured peacock or lamprey became impossible. Seasonal dishes tied to the rhythms of farming vanished. Communities lost a sense of continuity with their past. Yet, the story is not all loss. In recent years, there has been a growing interest in reviving ancient grains, wild herbs, and forgotten recipes. Chefs, historians, and farmers are working to rediscover the flavors of the past. By understanding what was lost, we can appreciate the richness of our culinary heritage, and perhaps bring some of it back to life. The disappearance of medieval foods is a reminder that what we eat is always changing. It's shaped by technology, economics, and the choices we make as a society. But every lost dish is also an invitation to remember, to explore, and to reconnect with the land and traditions that once sustained us. Closing. As we reach the end of our journey through the lost foods of the Middle Ages, it's clear that what we eat is more than just fuel for our bodies. Food is a living record of our history, our culture, and our connection to the land. Every forgotten dish, every vanished ingredient, is a chapter in the story of who we are. When we lose a food, we lose more than a recipe. We lose the wisdom of generations, the flavors that shaped our ancestors' lives, and the traditions that brought families and communities together. We lose the knowledge of how to work with the land, how to adapt to the seasons, and how to celebrate the bounty of nature. Preserving culinary history is not just about nostalgia. It's about understanding where we come from and how our choices today shape the future. By exploring the foods of the past, we can learn valuable lessons about sustainability, resilience, and creativity. We can rediscover ingredients that are better for our health and for the planet. We can revive traditions that bring people together and strengthen our sense of community. In a world that is changing faster than ever, it's easy to forget the roots of our food. But by looking back, we can find inspiration for the future. We can honor the farmers, cooks, and families who came before us by keeping their stories alive. We can ask ourselves what foods we want to pass on to the next generation. The lost foods of the Middle Ages remind us that nothing is permanent. Tastes change, crops come and go, and traditions evolve. But the spirit of curiosity, adaptation, and celebration lives on. So, let's not let these stories fade away. Let's seek out the forgotten grains, the wild herbs, and the ancient recipes that once nourished our world. Let's support farmers and chefs who are working to bring back the flavors of the past. Let's share these stories with our families, our friends, and our communities. Because every meal is an opportunity to connect with our history, with each other, and with the land that sustains us. The next time you sit down to eat, remember that you are part of a story that stretches back centuries. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be inspired to taste something new or something very, very old.